All right, good day, folks, and apologies for the late start. We're still not quite there yet, but do pray for us because we have a fantastic presentation lined up for you from Simon Terry, and we'll introduce you a bit more to him, Lord willing, shortly. But as you can see, he's not here yet because, well, you're best to explain, Sam. We've been up and down and all over the place.
Yeah, technical issues abound on today's stream. So I've been working overtime for the past, about 45 minutes trying to sort out the issue. We found a way around it. It's just about seeing if Simon can actually make it into the stream now. So do pray that he can do so.
Indeed, but that's all right. We've still got one or two things lined up that we were going to do anyway beforehand, so we will dive straight into those. And then, Lord willing, Simon will be here shortly to talk about slug snails, evangelism, and everything else as well. So we're going to start with a brief little update from Glenn and myself about what we've been doing in the last little while. So there should be some screens, some slides coming up onto the screen there. And who's this, Glenn?
This is a dear friend of ours. This is Kevin at WDEB radio station, and we spent Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday morning with Kevin in the studio for live, about a 1 hour long broadcast. And Kevin's a really just incredible man, but he gets pretty excited, and he got pretty excited when he saw this big bone that Joe brought in there with him, didn't he?
Yeah, it was great. We got to deal with everything from dinosaurs to why would a good God allow bad things to flood fossils and polystrate trees and living
fossils.
It was a great program, which will be available as well to listen to on our websites soon as well.
And then after the 3 days each morning being on the broadcast with him, we thought we would take a little time to go exploring and look for something that John had told us about that he found many years ago, and that was these polystrate trees. And the problem was we didn't have real clear directions there, and it was way at the top of a mountain. We first went there and scouted it out and saw this trail and thought, well, my four-wheel drive Jeep shouldn't make it to the top, but we probably ought to bring my four-wheeler just in case. And
like a quad bike type of thing.
A quad bike, yes. And we made it up this first stretch of road that you see there, turned the corner, and decided we better park the Jeep. It's not going to make it all the way up. Then we put all three of us, my wife and I and Joe, we had that thing weighted down, didn't we?
The back of the hill.
Yes. And we then we had about a 4-mile drive on trails that just got worse, much worse than that, steeper. And then they turned it really nice, and we made it to the back. But then from the point in the back where we parked the Jeep and couldn't go any further, all we had were notes. Just notes.
Just notes of working out where to go.
And the notes were interesting. They would just climb up this mountain, watch out for snakes, follow it along through these trenches, try not to get yourself killed.
Seriously, the instructions included the line, please try not to die.
Please try not to die. So we climbed up the mountain, just like they said. We found a trench that is from the coal mine industry, excavating out the coal, and leaves this big trough that like a big giant canal full of briars, and they told us it was full of snakes. And fortunately, we found some animal trails. Unfortunately, those animal trails had bear scat on it and a lot of hog prints.
Yeah, and potential large cat prints as well.
Yes.
So we were a little, but it was good. We got there and we got some good results.
We did. We found along the way, it was a very hard hike. And by the time we got to the back, we were exhausted. But, sometimes God leads us down difficult trails, but along those trails, there can be real blessings. And along that, we found some interesting things. Right here, I'm pointing at a stump, and you can see the roots broken off of this fossilized tree stump that at one time would have been standing up, would have been the base of a polystrate tree. Then we got to the back, and by the time we got to the back, my wife and I, we couldn't go on. We were exhausted. We knew we had another 2.5 hour hike back down out of there. And we told Joe, you got 30 minutes to find the polystrate trees, and he did. My gosh.
And the Lord was good because I was just about ready to give up, and we just come round the corner, and there they are, including great big chunks of things like this. If you put us up to full screen there, Sam. This is a great big equisedum. These things sit upright in the cliff there. This is an equisedum, which is one of those horsetail rushers. It's quite a large one. And today they're spindly little things, so they are still alive today. They're living fossils, but in the past they were much bigger. So you've not only got living fossils, you've also got devolution, and it's great examples of fast, rapid fossilization as well. So that's a really, really successful trip.
Successful trip, and we're planning on going back tomorrow with a couple of other younger people than me there to help. And we've got better equipment getting up there, and we found a better way to get to it, so we don't have to make that hard hike.
So yes, pray for us as we go on and do some more research over the next couple of days, and then I'm preaching again on Sunday, and we'll be all over the place. So sounds good. Right, we'll go over to John now because he's got a bit of a report. Because last night, John and I participated in a very long debate against multiple people over on Standing for Truth. It was quite the experience, and we have some of our own thoughts about it. But anyway, John, I believe you're going to speak on that a little bit, as well as some of the, one of the topics we talked about was the topic of snakes. So over to you.
That's true. I was up at the office late the other night, about 1:30 in the morning, and my grandson was just leaving his computer. You know what teenagers and early 20s are like on computers. And he came back and he said, "Grandpa, there's a snake on the gate." And I said, "What do you mean on the gate?" He said, "It's right there." I put my hand to open the gate and up the snake leapt. Okay, time for opportunity, photo opportunity. Now, put my slides up, please, Sam. There we are. There is the snake, baby python for sure. In fact, why aren't we moving here, Sam?
You need to bring your own slides up, John, on your laptop.
Oh, right. Okay. Sorry. Okay. I thought we had them up already.
Yeah, you have them up on you need to bring them up on your laptop. So go down to the PowerPoint, click on your full screen presentation, then you'll be able to scroll through them.
Okay. Okay, so we're doing it slightly differently tonight. Let's see if we can get this here. What a night we're having, guys.
I know.
Technical nightmare. This is literally a living nightmare for me. Everything is going wrong to do with technology.
It certainly is. In fact, my slides don't want to come up.
You go down to the bottom of your screen, you should be able to see the PowerPoint presentation there.
Yeah, no, wait there.
Over it, click on it.
No, that's not doing right there. I've got the PowerPoint for sure. PowerPoint slideshow. Are we up there now? Yes, we are. All right, that's good. Sorry for the delay, folks. A snail's pace, really, given that Simon's talking about snails. So I went down and had a good look at our baby python. And as I looked at the sign on the gate, I thought we need a new one now. Beware of the dog, beware of the snakes. Australia can be like that. We've got an awful lot of pythons, which are not too harmful. And there's my last year's crop, quite up close. They came and they sniffed me out. So I put my hand down and he would have a good old sniff with his tongue, because that's what he basically uses to sense where he is. But he's not going to hurt you at all. He barely even bites you unless he's really angry, and he's not venomous. But of course, he can strangle your dogs or your cats or rats or things like that. So we have some carpet pythons, named because they look like carpets. And our whole presentation the other night, just going back on the debate, involved the concept of snakes that used to have legs, involved the biblical principle of a dragon or a serpent that was cursed by God. So part of the evidence we presented in our debate format on Standing for Truth was the fact that devolution is the real history of the world, not evolution. Things have gone downhill. We'd encourage you, if you haven't seen some of these things on Standing for Truth, go to their channel and have a look. Of course, the news report from Australia involves a new mural. You'll see some Chinese characters on the right-hand side. you'll see the new mural of the Chinese version of the flood story. Yes, you heard me right. The Chinese have a traditional flood story going back to their ancestral characters who came to China. Biblically, of course, they came after Babel, and Babel came after Noah's flood. All right. Now, the characters on the right-hand side, the one at the top is traditionally called Quin, pronounced Chin, Chin. And that's a dynasty where we get the word Chinese from. And at the bottom, you'll see the Chinese character for boat. Now, I just didn't find this out. I had an old Presbyterian pastor, ex-missionary from China, who was kicked out by the communists. He introduced me to those sort of characters and said the Chinese character for boat is a big vessel with 8 people on it. And of course, he made a lot out of one big vessel that had 8 people on it, e.g. Noah's Ark. So that's part of a mural that's going up in our new Discovery Centre. And here's some background. The QIN, which is an antiquated way of spelling it, is actually pronounced CHIN in modern day English. And the people from Chin are Chinese, which you can see where we get our word Chinese from. If you know nothing about the Qin dynasty, then there it is, 221 to 206 BC. It was a significant period in Chinese history, known for things like the Great Wall. You say, why would we have a mural in the new museum on China and the flood? Well, the fact is, our museum is a place where quite a few Asians come, including Chinese, because it's an industrial site. And so the manager suggested, why don't we have information that can be used as a witness to them? And we thought, good idea. And one of the problems that troubles many people is you don't find China mentioned in the Bible. How do you get from the Tower of Babel to a Chinese version of Noah to modern versions of China? Let me show you what we found out. Here's the question that I took up seriously. Why do we call the study of Chinese things sinology? Sinology. Logy, of course, is the Latin Greek meaning a word about Sino. But why does Sino mean Chinese traditionally in English? I'll show you. There's the old character for the Qin or the Qin dynasty. Okay, stylized for sure, but that's what it is. Now, do you realize the trading in the ancient world was way bigger than most people think of? Oh, we only think of Marco Polo going to China. That the Chinese and the other nations traded backwards and forwards, and through the various trade pathways, the word Qin came into India. Oh, that's old Sanskrit. Now, I can't read Sanskrit. I'm very grateful that I found someone from Northeast India who can read Sanskrit. And they said that character is pronounced Qin, because that's what they used to call the people from China. And they wrote it down in Sanskrit. There's what they wrote down for me during the time of the third emperor of Magadha in the Indian subcontinent, 268 to 230 BC, that the region that is now China was known by various names, particularly Qin or Qin, as you and I spell it in modern versions of European languages. Now, this is before the Qin dynasty, because you find the Qin family was there for 5 or 6 centuries before it became the dominant dynasty in the northern part of China. Following on, we've now got the word into Sanskrit. From there, it turns into Old Latin and Old Greek. But look, it doesn't start with a CHIN now, it starts with an S. Now, have you ever wondered how languages change? One way is, I know when the English took over Scotland and they started to write down our names and the way they spelt them, basically because we were all speaking variations of a dialect, their problem was, what did he say? Did he say Mackay, 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 McCoy? So we ended up with 5 or 6 different versions of how to spell our name. Okay, so you go from QCH to a soft CH, which becomes an S by the time it gets into Latin and in Greek. Now, most of you can read Latin, but I grew up having to read a bit of Greek too, having to learn things like that. And what you discover is the Greeks and the Latins basically called Qin, China, the same thing, but they spelled it with an S. Because by the time they got out of India, the question was, what did they say? Now, I can't read Sanskrit, but I actually got the Sanskrit reader to confirm this. Yes, these people believe that China was spelt like that. Okay, how does it fit into your Bible? Genesis 10:17, Ham, Noah's son, gave rise to an offspring by the name of Canaan, gave us the Canaanites. You have the Tower of Babel, and then you find a group in Genesis 10:17 spelled Sinite. Now, you can read all sorts of discussions online by people who live in the West arguing over, are these foreigners? Are these Asians? Who are they? Are they the people from Sinai and the Arab Peninsula? Some even brave enough to suggest they're China. Let me tell you the steps that I took. There's your King James, because the Greek via the language of India got into the Latin, or vice versa. They still fight about who got that first. It gets into your Sanskrit, it gets into your English version rather, by your King James Bible, and that's what they translate Isaiah 49 as. Behold, there shall come from afar, and lo, these from the north and from the west, and these from the land of Sinims. There's the Hebrew. Of course, if you're reading from the left to the right, you can't read Hebrew. You read from the right to the left. The bottom line, the last word there, Sinim. There's no doubt about it. The King James is a very good translation, literally, of that Bible verse. It talks about the people from the north, the west, the east, etc., and from the land of Sinim. But I did one step further. I thought, I wonder how the Chinese put this, and how do they read it? Now, you too can go online to your Blue Letter Bible and even find a Chinese version. They're the official one. See, Isaiah 49:12, that's in English. You can read that. The rest of you, well, people struggle because the Chinese don't use letters. They use symbols. And you see the last symbol on the bottom left-hand side? If you think you've seen something like that, you certainly have. It's in the Chinese letter. Well, I'll show you what I did. The easy way to get around this is just to press your Google Translator. And you've got that on the screen. Google Translator brings up this. Look, these come from afar, these from the north, these from the west, and these from the state of Qin. Now, in case you've forgotten, from the state of Chin, pronounced Chin, from which we get Chinese. Now, if you're trying to sort it out in English and Latin, you won't get very far. But by the time you go over to the Chinese versions and see how they translate it back into their language, you've got the Chinese as descendants mentioned in the Bible. No wonder they have the story of Noah's Ark. The Aborigines do too. We all have an ancestral version of Noah's story because we all got off the same boat. Technically, we're all boat people. So why do we call the study of Chinese sinology? There's the history. What did he say? Did he say ch? Did he say k? Did he say s? So we end up with sinology, the study of China. And if you're witnessing to Asian people and they don't know where they fit in, now you do. You can take them to Isaiah 49, you can take them to Genesis chapter 10, and you can actually trace these words all the way down to the modern Chinese version. So as we put up the history of China on a mural, this mural is 3 meters long, 2 meters high, and that will be a very prominent one as people come up the steps into the building at our new Creation Discovery Centre here in Queensland. Of course, if you're visiting, come and see us in Queensland, come and see our museum down in Tasmania, or pop into England when Joe and the others are there and see it in England. Okay, switch me back, please, Sam. All right, so we've got Simon Terry coming up now. I met Simon Terry years ago, and Joe's going to introduce how he did it. But I did bring something in which reminded me of Simon, because I went outside and I found myself a snail. Now, as Simon will confirm, if we can get him up, you're looking very worried there, Sam. I've actually asked him, can you eat these? Because I've got millions of them, and they're a pain in the butt, really. They really are. They kill all my plants. They burrow under the ground. They live in winter under the straw. I can't get rid of them. I've tried everything except eating them. Well, we'll let Simon answer those things. Joe, how did you get to meet Simon?
I got to meet Simon through you. He came and visited one of the debates, which you did with Patrick Richmond, the theistic evolutionist, way back in 2014, I think it was. And that's when I first met him, and sort of stayed in touch ever since then. And he's been involved with the ministry for a while, and he goes way back. He's come and been a big supporter of the museum and the work in the UK. But his real passion is not just for slugs and snails and mollusky things, but he's actually worked as a full-time evangelist for a number of years and is still heavily involved in evangelism and in the process of moving back into full-time evangelism as well. And so it'd be wonderful if we can get him up on the show, but at the moment we currently don't have him. What's it looking like, Sam?
Well, the update I have is that he's tried his desktop computer and his mobile, and it doesn't want to play ball. He's trying his laptop because it's got slightly faster internet for some strange reason. And I have yet to see him appear.
Okay. Well, in that case, let's.
Why don't we ask Diane to bring her report on snails, and that'll give us a bit more leeway time to actually rescue Simon, hopefully.
Go for it.
Diane?
Yes. Well, we will send out a newsletter, an email newsletter sometime soon. And while we were thinking about snails, because we had Simon Terry coming, I came across this report about a survey that was done in Australia. Now, in Australia, we have lots of bushfires. And so a lot of people are involved in fire rescue, and they have lots of volunteers. And so a group of scientists from Charles Darwin University, now that is a real place up in the Northern Territory in the city called Darwin, they did a survey of a couple of thousand Australians to see what they would give priority to in saving things in a wildfire. And they were given a list of things and asked to say what's most important, what is least important. Now, two of the options were a person who had been warned and a person, that's one person who had been warned but had ignored it. And then they were given a whole lot of, 11 things altogether. Some animals, including koalas and wallabies, and a population of snails, if it was eliminated, would have been the extinction of that particular species, and then a few infrastructure things. And the scientists were fascinated and troubled, and those were their words. They found it fascinating and troubling that people valued one human life more than the extinction of an entire non-human species. Because in the survey results, they found that the population of snails actually got a negative result. In other words, people were more likely to say, no, we'll put that one at the bottom of the priorities rather than the top. And then at the end of their paper, they wrote, our society values one human life more than millions of years of evolution that can be eclipsed almost immediately in the extinction of another species. So there are a couple of issues here is what do you define as a species? Because what has been arbitrarily defined as a species may be just one variation within kind that live in a particular area. So having them wiped out is not really a problem biologically, because after the fire, others can move in. But the most important issue, of course, is how do you value a human life compared with other species? So what is unique about human beings? Because this was a general survey done to secular people, and intrinsically everyone values human life rather than other types of life, because there's something unique about human beings, and that is because we were made in the image of God. And when I was reading this report, I was reminded of what Jesus said about God's care for us. And Jesus says, well, you are worth more than many sparrows. Well, according to this survey in Australia, you are also worth many snails. And maybe we can go back to us. Have we made any
Indeed,
progress?
we can come to us, and I think we have made some progress as well. Because testing. Can you hear us, Simon?
I can hear you well. Can you hear me?
And there's no lag. Oh, it's a miracle. Praise the Lord. Hey. We got there eventually.
All right. Well, praise the Lord, and let's really rejoice in this, which is fantastic. But John, over to you. Why don't you introduce Simon properly?
Okay, well, I'll go back to my snail. Simon, remember how we've corresponded on little bugs like this that inhabit my garden, all of that. And I asked you, could we eat them? And I remember you telling me a definite no, it's not worth the risk. Why did you tell me these snails can't be eaten by us?
Well, it depends what you're eating, John. I mean, land snails are a delicacy in many places. They're eaten by the French and the German, and the Africans eat them, but they do contain nematodes. And so you have to cook them extremely well before you eat them. And
now I understand what a nematode is. How about our listeners? Tell us what a nematode is, Simon, and then we'll sort of introduce where you and I fit together and hand over to you for your long snail-paced slow show.
Right, so nematodes, they're tiny parasitic worms, very, very tiny, and they tend to find their way into the guts of land snails, land slugs. And usually they pass their way through the system. But if you're going to eat one, it'll enter your system. And so that's where it becomes rather complicated. Right. That's where you can get meningitis from eating land snails. But I mean, there's several different species you can eat. Right. So there are ones that are notoriously bad.
But would like to thank the viewers who put up their suggestions on how to get rid of snails, because as I discovered with Simon's assistance one year, I get millions of snails as soon as summer starts, because he said they're living under the ground. So I went and checked, and there they are, thousands of snails fast asleep underneath the warm hay. And the interesting thing was the readers or watchers who are saying, we find blue-tongued lizards, we find all of these creatures will eat the snails. Well, I've had blue-tongued lizards on my property for 47 years, and they can't eat the snails fast enough. So thanks for the suggestion. And we've had someone say use Peking ducks. Must be because I was speaking about China in the Bible. But Peking ducks and other ducks are well known for actually not eating your plants. They'll actually eat the snails and the insects around it. But I hate to tell you, I don't know how many Peking ducks I'd need to start peeking on the snails in order to win them. So we are still at a loss here. And this little guy, he eats all my chocos. Now, if you don't know what chocos are, they're like a green, juicy pear that's got an anesthetic sap around the edge. You can put it on cuts and it gets rid of the pain. Whether it stimulates the snails, I don't know, but it certainly stops my crop coming on, and I hate them for that. Well, I don't hate them. They're one of God's little creatures, and I'm sure they've got a good job to do somewhere. Perhaps Simon can help us with that. But in reality, Simon, I've corresponded with you a lot over the time. We've done field trips on the Isle of Wight together over the years. It's been great to be with you, and thanks for finally not giving up and joining us there. And thanks for Sam for your technical stuff as well. So, Simon, over to you for what you are going to share with us to start before we have our Q&A.
Thank you, John. Okay, Sam, could I have the PowerPoint up? Is that possible?
Absolutely. I'll control it on my end, so just say when you want the next slide.
Okay. Next slide, please.
And 2 seconds. There you go.
Okay. Fantastic. Well, it's first of all, Bill, blessing to be with you tonight. It's been a rather difficult time getting online, but we're here now. That's good. So tonight's message is a rather unique one. Not everyone's cup of tea. I hope to change that. And perhaps a little bit of information about me, where I'm from. So, as John said, my name's Simon Terry. I qualified as a school teacher many years ago. Next slide, please. But I went straight into mission. So my background is effectively in the mission field. I joined London City Mission and worked and served there for a number of years. Next slide, please. In 2007, I joined Answers in Genesis as one of their speakers. Enjoyed that immensely. Next slide, please. But from 2009 to around 2020, I worked as an evangelist. And so most of my time was spent working at 5 districts in the Midlands. And that's engaging the culture and sharing the gospel of Christ. But around sort of, I suppose, if we can have the next slide, please. My love for tonight's subject goes back to my early childhood days. It was after my conversion in my late teens, I developed, should we say, a deeper appreciation for the subject. And I volunteered at London Zoo with their part to the breeding program. I then jumped into breeding tropical land snails myself. This, in fact, is one of them, deceased. And for the past 20 years, I've been working on a project, next slide please, that studies orticology. It's a rather unique term, but it describes the relationship a specific species has, its interaction with the environment. And this creature on the screen is a Roman import. It was brought to the UK by the Romans and is actually eaten. And apparently it's very nice with garlic. I haven't had one myself, but they are quite a large animal and a delicacy. And I've been studying this creature for about 18 years and hope to one day get my work published. Next slide, please. So slugs and snails, this is a talk I've done before. It's one I like to use because it does set the scene or reset the scene. It hopefully appreciates the unappreciated. And it's called the right perspective because it's changing or hopefully challenges our attitudes to life in general. It challenges a number of different things, but specifically it will challenge our perspectives on these slimy creatures. Next slide, please. You see, maybe tonight there's a few of us here, or maybe online you're listening and you can't stand them. I meet many people who just cannot stand slugs and snails. I think slugs get a particular loathing. But for some people, it's more than that. They hate them with a passion. Perhaps they've picked up one on the compost bin and they just wish they had gardening gloves on, and their immediate reaction is to kill the creature. Well, why is that? Well, they don't like it, and that's their response, is to kill it. So it's sad reaction, but it's one that's quite common. Or maybe next slide, please. Maybe your hostas have holes in them, and your reaction is to grab the poison, the scissors, the skinks, the shotgun, and destroy every slug and snail you can find. Doesn't matter what shape or size or color it is, you want them all dead. Interesting. That's one perspective. Next slide, please. And this one's a big one. Maybe tonight you've been led to believe Darwin's window on the world, and you believe that slugs and snails and the rest of life evolved from a common ancestor. And in this case, for the slug or the snail, it's a HAM, which stands for a hypothetical ancestral mollusk. Next slide, please. I believe in all of these instances, we have the completely wrong perspective on these animals. And it's my aim tonight to present to you the right perspective, the biblical foundation for these amazing animals. And so I want us, if we can, to learn to love them. And I've got 3 integrating points just to bring to our attention tonight. The first one, if I may, is our origin. Thank you, Sam. The next one is their special purpose. And thirdly, their incredible biology. And I'm going to literally skim the surface. There's so much more to discover, but I'm going to give you the broad overview. And last of all, I'll round off with a short conclusion to our subject matter. So without further ado, let's turn to their origin. Next slide, please, Sam. And we'll go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So if you look at the Bible is very clear on this point. Just one look at creation, one look, and you will see clearly God's invisible act. As the Bible says, you will see his eternal power. You will see his nature by looking at the creation. None of us, according to the Apostle Paul, are without excuse. And slugs and snails are no exception. Next slide, please. The Bible is also very clear on how slugs and snails were created. And they were created according to their kinds. 10 times the Hebrew word min is used in Genesis chapter 1. And we're told, next slide please, in reference to the sea creatures, it should be verse 22, or we've managed to miss a slide there, excuse me. So keep that slide there, thank you. So Genesis chapter 1 verse 22 tells us, in reference to sea creatures, that they'll bring forth after their kind. They'll be fruitful and multiply. So in other words, plants, animals, human beings were created to reproduce within these boundaries. And it's not difficult to work out. It really isn't. Now, this creature on the screen here is an old friend of mine. This is, I think his name is Beryl. They do carry both sexes, but I thought it was cute to give it the name Beryl. This is a slug called Orion rufus, and it's a member of a family called the Aronidae. Now, next slide, please. Thank you. So here we have the few varieties of another species, Orion ater, and both are very hard to identify one from the other, rufus and ater. And if you dissect them, you can tell the difference. But the science is obvious. These are creatures which are part of a family. They're all part of a kind, and they can interbreed. Next slide, please. Here is another Orion. Not all Arians can interbreed. Only a few, Ater and Rufus, I think, can produce hybrids. But this is Orion intermedius. It's a little tiny slug. It's in the Orion family. Its common name is the hedgehog slug. When it gets scared, it can raise its tubercles in its back and pretend to be a hedgehog. That's our character to it. But these are the same family. And so kinds are similar species that scientists today recognize as families. Great variety in that family, but it's easy to see. It really is what family they belong to. Next slide, please. Carl von Linné is famous for his work on classification, and he gave us what I call the grand filing cabinet of life. So next slide, please. Carl von Linné classified life according to the degree of similarity. And the best way of thinking of this is to think of an index system. And as you move down that filing system, the boxes get narrower. So if you press through these, Sam, for us, the first two should come up. So then we have the kingdom box and the phylum box. The problem with this system is that it has too many boxes, and it leads to I think, a lot of confusion. So here again is our Orion rufus slug, and this slug belongs obviously in the animal kingdom. It's an animal, but that's a huge box. That's a massive box, and there are lots and lots and lots of animals, as we know. So the refinement comes when we put our slug into a slightly smaller grouping called the phylum, and for this we have the mollusca, the mollusks. Next slide, please. This is a cuttlefish, and guess what box he is in? He is in the mollusk box. But the mollusk is a word that comes from the Latin, which from mollis, meaning soft. But the cuttlefish is not a slug. In fact, the cuttlefish is nothing like a slug. Next slide, please. This is an nautilus, and it's completely different to slugs and snails. And shockingly, this creature is also found in mollusca. They're soft, correct, but that's as far as it goes. And the textbooks will tell you they're related, but they're not. There's no direct link between the slug and the Nautilus. Next slide, please. So our Orion slug is then further distilled, if you like, through these boxes, placed in a class box. Thank you, Zan. Next tab, please. Thank you. And this is the a more refined category called gastropods or gastropoda. Next slide, please. It means stomach foot. It comes from the Greek gastro meaning stomach and poda meaning foot. And so gastropods had this muscular tum-tum on which they crawl around. But it's a massive, massive box, and we need to even move further on in our classification. Thank you, Sam. I'm going to skip past this next one. These are the stylomorphs. If you click on the next slide, please, Sam. If your eyes sit at the top of these retractable eye stems, you qualify for the stylomorph team. And so we have a huge box here, but it contains slugs and snails that have these retractable stems, these eye stems. Thank you, Sam. Next slide, please. That can include the aquatic forms as well. This next slide is perhaps where we're close to home in terms of our classification. This is the family level. And this may be the box, I think, in most cases, which typically classifies the kinds of creation. Next slide, please. This gorgeous slug is the banana slug, Aerolymax, and it's from the Pacific Northwest, and it's in that same family as our Orion rufus. It has so many similarities. And so if you click down again, please, Sam, within this family, you will find a number of genera, and that's where you get the bloom or the flare of of God's kinds. Thank you, Sam. Next slide, please. So our Orion rufus is one of many Orions that have these wonderful characteristics. Next slide, please. This is Orionata again. And again, so to cut confusion here, creation began with kinds. Genesis chapter 1 classifies them today as families. You can have great variety in that family, but it's important to make it easy to see which family these animals belong to. Now, it comes as no surprise that history that we read about in Genesis has come under great attack over the years, and particularly the 1800s. Next slide, please. Evolution in millions of years, popularized by Charles Darwin and Charles Lyell, gave us a whole new window on the world, a whole new way of thinking. You say Charles Lyell, a bit of a faceless fellow to our generation, but he is a key man to the attack on the Bible. Next slide, please. There he is. There's Charles Lyell. If you check the records, most people in England during the 1800s had a biblical worldview. They believed the scriptures' historicity and gave us 6,000 years of life. They held to a global flood in Noah's day. They had that science or that knowledge of Moses. Next slide, please. But of course, we know that letters have been released, I believe, from Charles Lyell's sister-in-law. Charles Lyell was on a mission to get rid of that history and replace that history with his own history. He plans in this scheme what will get rid of what will free the science from Moses. He talks about the mischief and the scandal brought on them by the Mosaic systems. He's referring to Moses. He's referring to the Bible here. Next slide, please. And he schemes here that if ever that geology in the Bible could be set down without giving any offense, it would be an historical sketch. I love what John said some years ago. He said, in other words, I think he said that Lyell was replacing history A with history B. And that's what the Nazis did in World War II. You change the future of the country by changing the history that people understand. how they perceive. Next slide, please. In fact, the plan worked so well that Charles Darwin confessed to his grandson in 1873 that Lyell's convinced he's shaken the faith in the deluge. That's the flood of Genesis. And he says this, by never having said a word against the Bible. This is fascinating. Under the guise of a churchman, he attacks the very foundation upon which England rested. And here's the attack. Next slide, please. The present is the key to the past. That's the philosophy which now underpins all modern science, and particularly our subject tonight of slugs and snails, would you believe? The Bible presents the complete opposite picture. The Bible shows us the past is key to understanding the present day world. Charles Lyell didn't want the history of Scripture being forefront in our minds. And so, better known, next slide please, Sam, thank you. Here's the attack, here's his project, here's his philosophy of thinking, which rejects biblical history. Our present day view of the world, which is expressed in terms of millions and billions of years, has this anti-Moses, anti-Christian, anti-biblical basis to it. Next slide, please. And these pretty pictures that we get in our school textbooks are a philosophy. They're nothing to do with science whatsoever. So many scientists are aware of this hidden history of science with Lyell and Darwin. They're unaware of how we've come to arrive really truly at these pretty pictures. There's been an intent, a very anti-intent against the scriptures. That's the foundation of that philosophy. Next slide, please. And of course, Lyell's legacy is massive, it's tragic, it's even affected the way we read the book of Genesis. We've not got time to look at this in great detail tonight, but suffice to say, it's caused many to compromise the plain contextual reading of the Bible. Now, my purpose tonight is to be faithful to the text and show you how what we observe in creation actually is hand in glove with what we read in the biblical record. Next slide, please. Lyell's legacy has left a serious wake. The train of advocates to this philosophy stretches miles. David Attenborough had made a very broad statement in his series Life in the Undergrowth. And he was seen wandering through a lovely, well-stocked English garden, and he alights on some sleeping garden snails. And he comments, many of the mollusks in the sea develop shells to protect themselves from predators. But on land, those shells serve just as well to keep the occupant nice and moist. So, without any major change to their anatomy, mollusks were able to creep up out of the water and graze in the forests of algae and mosses that were then spreading over the land. And given the right conditions, they still do. Well, I've got a problem with that, because for a snail to leave the ocean for life on land requires a major change in their anatomy. A terrestrial lung is very different to a gill. The leap to a lung requires meaningful, specified, complex, coded instructions. This supposed marine ancestry has never ever been observed, ever been recorded. And given the right conditions, they can't, because they're different kinds. So what do we actually observe? Well, I've observed it myself. Next slide, please. There are snails that live in the sea called prosoprancs. The common periwinkle uses gills to breathe, and it keeps water within its mantle cavity so the gills can function when the tide goes out. It's an amazing design. So these are the periwinkles. Next slide, please. And this is another example of one of those sea snails, and close up, and you can see the body coming out there. They are an amazing little creature. Next slide, please. But there are other winkles, like this one, the land winkle, that are not equipped for life at sea at all. The breathing apparatus for this land winkle is very, very different. And again, Genesis reminds us that these creatures on land and sea were created independently from each other. Next slide, please. And it's not just the lungs that need changing. This is an air-breathing pond snail, the Neostagnalis. It breathes air like our land winkle, but it lives in water. If you take it out of the water, it dies. There's so much more to their sophisticated biology than truly meets the eye. Its home is the water, but it breathes air as a lung. Next slide, please. And there are slugs that live in the sea that have gills, the Epistobranchs. Next slide, please. And there are slugs that live on the land that breathe air, like our Orion rufus. And it's easy to see how different they are and which belongs in which group or kind. Next slide, please. Contrary to what media will tell you and secular scientists will tell you, we all have the same science. Next slide, please. Specifically, and this is the root of the word here, science means to have knowledge or state of knowing. Science means knowledge. That's all it means. Next slide, please. And so observational science is a science that deals with the stuff you can observe. Next slide, please. That's why we can build things like aircraft and, next slide, please, launch satellites into the heavens. Next slide, please. But when that scientist who digs up dinosaur bones using that same science speaks of millions of years, he's just left the science he can see, obviously. Next slide, please. And he's jumped into history, historical science. You can't see the past. The past is gone. David Attenborough, with great respect to him, didn't see marine snails, leaving life in the ocean for life on land. You can't test that science. You can't repeat that science. It's unobservable. Next slide, please. And it's your starting point tonight that determines how you'll use the data, how you'll read the evidence, how you'll understand the past. And ultimately, there are only two real bases here. Either you start with the revealed history, the testament of the Bible, the one who's always been there, knows everything, or you trust the speculations of human wisdom, the ideas, and that's all they are, of men like Charles Darwin and Charles Lyell, who want to rewrite the past because they hate God. That's the truth of the matter. Next slide, please. And it's so exciting because when you start with the science or use the science you can see, and this is one aspect I love about creation research, it always confirms the real history of life in the scriptures. That is the history, the science you can't see. Next slide, please. This project, Evolution Mega Lab, it spanned Europe for many years, and it sought to train up children to think like Charles Darwin. And guess what they used? They used snails. Next slide, please. The website opens. Welcome to Evolution Mega Lab. Do you know that thanks to a common little snail you can find in your garden, in the park or under a hedge, you can, and now please watch this word, you can see evolution in your own backyard. Next slide, please. This activity introduces pupils to Darwin's ideas on evolution by looking at variation, adaptation, and distribution of banded snails. So here we have, it's very interesting this, we have variation, number one, we have adaptation, number two, and distribution of banded snails that gives us evolution. Okay, let's just see if we can see this. Next slide, please. So here we have a typical banded snail. There's two main varieties in the UK with the white lips, the brown lips. It's the brown lips, and they're polymorphic. Next slide, please. So they have different colours, banding, that's shell stripes, as adults. They're exquisite little things, and this variation is clearly typical of the species. There's no conflict here whatsoever with the Bible. Actually, it's what you expect to see, given they're reproducing after their kind. They're producing banded snails in great variety. Next slide, please. So observations on this megalab conclude this. Darker shell types tend to be more common in woodland, but the background colour is brown. Next slide, please. And here's my test example. I've been there, got the t-shirt, got the photograph. Here it is. Observations conclude that. Good science so far. But I'm not seeing evolution. I'm seeing simply a variant in the same kind. Next slide, please. Evolution Megalab says, while in grassland, the banded snails tend to be lighter coloured, yellow, and have more stripes. This camouflage is an example of adaptation. Next slide, please. Again, this is a good observation. And that's where we find, and this kind of snail survives well in grassland. So there's an effect called the albedo effect, where lighter shells reflect light differently. But again, I'm not seeing any evolution whatsoever. Next slide, please. There's been a big decrease in the numbers of song thrushes in some places over the past 30 years. Next slide, please. So depending on where you live, these predators, the song thrush, have been in decline, and yes, may indeed affect the distribution of these wonderful little snails. But again, I'm not seeing evolution whatsoever. Next slide, please. Darker shells, I love this. Darker shells used to be more common in the north and in the south. Again, more great science. It's a great observation. But finding lighter coloured snails in the north of the country is a trend I jump on. It's great science, but I'm still left begging the question, where is this evolution I'm supposed to be observing? Next slide, please. And here's the wrap. You get this? Okay, so evolution is a very slow process. Life on Earth started about 3.5 billion years ago. It's the tiny changes accumulating over a long time that got us here. And you can see some of those tiny steps by joining Evolution Megalab. Here's my problem. Those tiny changes are what I'd expect to see. Differences, yes. Changes, yes. But within the kind, they're still banded snails. I'm not seeing any evolution whatsoever. Evolution postulates that one kind will transform into a completely different kind. But did you catch the catch? It takes so long to happen, you wouldn't expect to see it. Next slide, please. Mr. Dawkins, in a debate with our dear John, said this: you're using the word see as meaning see within one lifetime. If a phenomenon takes millions of years, of course you are not going to see it. Next slide, please. In an interview with Bill Moyers, he said evolution has been observed, it's just it hasn't been observed while it's happening. And there's the catch. You wouldn't expect to see it because it takes so long to happen. Ipso facto, you do not see it. That's the reality. Next slide, please. Famous quote, Dr. Kemp. To account for evolutionary changes that take millions of years to completion, solely by reference to processes that can be studied over tens of years, requires what? An extraordinary faith. And indeed it is extraordinary. Next slide, please. Next tab, please, Sam, thank you. So when you look at those lovely snails and use the same science, you can clearly see, no guesswork, they do exactly as God said they do. They bring forth after their kind, and children are entitled to know that. Next slide, please. You can go to the next slide, please, Sam. Thank you. One of the great fun projects I've done at home is called Spot the Difference. And you can go to a stretch of hedgerow, our garden plot, and discover how many colours and bands you can find in that one species. Genesis chapter 1 in your backyard, not evolution. And to God be the glory, not Charles Darwin. Next slide, please. Now, I'll close this little first part of the evening with one of my favourite slugs called the testacella. These are subterranean slugs. They hunt and eat earthworms, and they have a small shell plate on their tail. If you look at the top of the picture there, you'll see a little plate. That's the slug's tail. And these slugs are, next slide please, are all very similar. They own this distinctive shell plate. Next slide please. Thank you. We have observed the introduction of a similar slug in recent years called the ghost slug, Slilocalanus, but that does lack a tail plate. But it is a hunter and lives underground. Next slide, please. Evolution postulates that life underground made necessary the reduction of the cumbersome shell, which as a result, and it goes on, leaves this particular family with the only meagre rest of a glassy shell carried at the tip of the tail. A similar thing happened to the snails of the Testacelidae during their evolution. Again, this supposed loss no one has ever observed. We do find tail-plated slugs, but it's a giant leap of faith to conclude they once lived inside them. Next slide, please. So what we observe, actually, is what Genesis has been telling us all along. The record is the reality, and all we observe supports that. They bring forth after their kinds. Next slide, please. Little note of caution here. These elusive slugs carry these sharp harpoon-like radula. When they use it on your hand, it's excruciating. A friend of mine was holding one once, and it bit her, and the effect was excruciatingly painful. So please watch yourself if you find one of these little slugs crawling around your back garden. So we've gone from their origin, and now I want to look at, if I may, their purpose. The purpose of these amazing animals. Next slide, please, Sam. And they do have an amazing purpose. Let me fly you, if I may, to the foggy forests of Western North America. Next slide, please. These forests are incredibly beautiful. Coastal redwoods. One day I'd like to go. When I say giant, we're talking about trees 90 meters high. Next slide, please. They are truly enormous trees. And one of the very unique features of these forests, next slide, please, is the famous fog drip that accounts for 40% of the water found in these forests. I'm sure Craig knows a thing or two about these trees. During warm coastal weather, you have a belt of fog that moves from the coast inland some 25 miles. And during the early hours of the morning, the fog condenses and gets trapped in the upper story foliage. And the redwoods, they capture more than they need. And so the fog drip provides refreshment for all the lower understory vegetation and creatures that live in these forests. Without these tall trees to catch the fog, the forest would change detrimentally. And so when you find damage done to your redwood seedlings, you need to find the culprit. Next slide, please. There was a research project undertaken in California, and they sought to identify the cause of the damage of these young redwood seedlings. And from one giant to another, the huge gigantean banana slug was the suspected villain. Next slide, please. And there was an experiment devised where they had a number of slugs they put together, and they kept these slugs in a box, and they didn't feed the slugs but left them with the seedlings. And what happened was the slugs ate up all the little fungi and other plants that grew in between these redwood seedlings, but never touched the seedlings. They're protecting young trees from other plants that were competing for light, competing for space, and of course, nutrients. They were protecting actually these seedlings from competition. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. And this is the power of this biome, is that these wonderful slugs literally clean the forest floor. It's part of the design. They consume roots and seeds and bulbs and flowers and ferns. Even the poison oak, which is toxic to human beings, these slugs will eat. They'll eat animal droppings, they'll eat carcasses, and that's something we just can't do ourselves. These are creatures designed to do what they do, and they do it extremely well. And of course, their scats they produce are rich in nitrogen, and they'll provide fertilizer for the forest. Next slide, please. And as the trees mature, they provide the damp conditions upon which this slug and so many other animals and plants are dependent. Next slide, please. And there's so much more. Other seeds and spores that are consumed by these slugs will work their way through the digestive tract, and they'll be dispersed through their droppings, and they'll provide future plants for the forest, which in turn feed the banana slugs who sowed them in the first place. It's amazing. I find it absolutely amazing the vital role these slugs play in the life of the forest, and in particular their contribution to the life of the giant redwood. Next slide, please. It does get a bit revealing. 2 years ago, or not 2 years, excuse me, some many years ago, there's news reports that were flashing about monster slugs from the Iberian Peninsula that were swarming across Britain, fueled by rain. And this is a slug which has threatened food security. Orion vulgaris. And in mainland Europe, would you believe these particular slugs? Next slide, please. Here's the creature. These slugs, they are comical. They have become a highway hazard. Entire roads have been closed off because of their cannibalistic tendency. Any slug that is killed becomes a magnet to munch on, and so you get these roads covered in a slimy slick as all these slugs get crushed by the cars. But again, it's just showing us here that creation's not working as it should be. There's problems. Next slide, please. We've looked at the flesh-eating testacella and the ghost slug. Next slide, please. There are other flesh eaters like the cone snails. Next slide, please, Sam. These are a family of sea snails called Toxoblossa, which means poisoned tongue. They have a tongue like yours and mine that comes out their heads, and at the tip of their tongue they have a hypodermic needle, which they can reload like a bolt-action rifle. And one of those conids, this one here is the geographer's cone, or that's in fact the textile cone, I think. Bit confused there. That's the geographer's cone. Next slide, please. Here we are. The geographer's cone is one which is highly toxic. It's been responsible for at least 30 human fatalities. One such attack was back in June of 1935. A young, very fit football player was heading for Hayman Island, the coast of Queensland. Tropical waters, lovely crystal clear. He heads back to from the reef, and he handles a geographer's cone. The creature did inject him, and it wasn't long before the poor chap left this life. Death took place hours after he was stung. Here's a point which I've not provided until this point, but it brings a whole new perspective on life, doesn't it? Please turn back to Genesis chapter 1. Next slide, please. Genesis records that the creation at the end of it was very good. And that includes all the slugs and snails that God created. Next slide, please. And the change we've seen, the change of history, which changes everything. Man's rebellion has brought death into the world. Cone snails killing people was not part of the original very good creation. In fact, in Romans chapter 8, next slide, please, we're reminded it was our sin in Adam that led the world into corruption and futility. Paul makes this very, very clear. Many of us fail to realize the trouble these cone snails bring and land slugs causing highway hazards is because of our rebellion. The world has changed. The world is not the world once created. I think the sad thing is we've been programmed to think like Charles Darwin. Cone snails killing people is just part of life. It's not. It's a corrupted world. It's a world that's broken. And I marvel at a society that hangs its worldview on the ideas of a man over the word of God. I marvel at that. Next slide, please. The right perspective we should have, because of our right foundation, is one of thankfulness and remorse. Thankfulness that these amazing creatures process our land, and of course, remorseful. The world is not the world it once was because of man's rebellion. And that's where we rest our second point for this evening, the ultimate point in their special purpose. And I've got a quote, if I may, from Mr. Ken Ham. Next slide, please. Even what man considers to be one of the lowliest of animals is in fact an exquisite and marvelous testimony to the handiwork of our Creator God, invoking a deep sense of awe, wonder, and praise. Next slide, please. Okay, excuse me. Just going to get my notes around here. So, our next slide is looking at the study of these creatures. Next slide, please. If you go to Psalm 143, verse 5, we're reminded of David's meditation on the works of God. He is musing on the work of God's hands. He looks back at what God has done. David was a man taken up with God. Next slide, please. And in Job 37, God himself counsels a man called Job to listen, to stand still and consider the wondrous works of God. There's an old silent film, next slide please, called Microcosmos from 1996. And I love the song that's played. Look at your feet. Open your eyes before you die. Sit on the grass, observe and paint. In other words, look at the window of the created world and marvel. Marvel at that world. Next slide, please. Oh, that shouldn't be there. Next slide, please. Oh, slide's gone missing. If you go back a slide, please, Sam. There should be a slide there, but it's gone. Okay, so I want to just have a look at this marvel for a moment. There's so much I'm going to miss, but I'm going to cover a sort of broad brush here with these amazing animals, give you a little window into their biology. So here you can see one of the banded snails, and if you look at the top eye stems there, they're optical. The bottom set are sensory. They have chemical sense. Next slide, please. Slugs have the same. They carry the same apparatus. Next slide, please. Oh, this is the slide I missed out. This is the African land snail. And again, slug or snail, they both carry these eye stems. They can see vision in part, but not as good as we can. Next slide, please. Some snails have their eyes at the base of their tentacles. If you look at this pond snail here, they can't retract them, but the eyes are at the base. They're quite different to our stylomorphs. Thank you. Next slide, please. Now for feeding, this is an amazing bit of kit. It really is, the radula. It's an organ that looks a little bit like an elastic band, and it's armed with rows and rows and rows of sharp, backward pointing teeth. And in some cases, 27,000 of them. And they can replace these like a shark. And this rasping band works in concert, next slide please, with a jaw. This is the banana slug here, and it's chomping on a leaf. And the jaw and the radula work a little bit like a guillotine. Next slide, please. Now, I'm not too sure this works, Sam, your end. It probably doesn't work. No, this is the film I got of a West African species of tropical land snail, and this will show the radula in place, but we can't show that film. Next slide, please. This is the brown-lipped snail, just reaching adulthood. When they get to adulthood, they have a brown or dark ridge on the base of their shell, and it's grazing on algae, particular favorite food of these particular snails. Next slide, please. And this was taken many years ago from my children's play set, and you've got the radula marks there on the play set cover of the land snail. Next slide, please. Now, this is an old picture of one of my land snails from West Africa. The top orange bar, that's the jaw, and the bottom, it's the bottom set there. That's the radula that comes up. Thousands of tiny teeth. I've got a sound clip. I'm not too sure I can show it. I can't show it to you, Sally, tonight, but I'll play it to you. But there's a clip I've got of the radula rasping against plastic. One night I was in the office working, and one of these land snails was chomping at the plastic. It was very, very loud. It's an incredible bit of hardware. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. I'll go past this one. Next slide, please. So the radula on this dog whelk has been used with a softening chemical to bore holes in its prey. And sadly, for some strange reason, another whelk has preyed upon another whelk. That hole has been made by another whelk. They're predatory. Next slide, please. Here's a hole in a mussel shell I found some years ago, with the dog whelk was in the very process of drilling through into the mussel to eat. Quite a unique, again, piece of equipment. Next slide, please. This is a very voracious predator. This is called the rosy wolf snail, Euglandina rosea. It's part of a family of wolf snails, if you like, that have this amazing radula. So it has a long esophageal tube from its head, which houses these very long radula that slice through flesh, which will suck into its stomach, and they actually do eat other snails, and they've been known to go underwater in search of pond snails. Next slide, please. Land snails and slugs have a lung. Can you spot the hole on the mantle shield of this Orion slug? That's called the pneumostome. The slug actually breathes through this pore, which you can open and close. And so if you look inside that pore, you are looking at this slug's equivalent of a lung. Next slide, please. This is the Roman snail, which I've been studying, and you can see the pneumostome underneath the shell there, on the right-hand side, just beneath the shell's lip. Next slide, please. Sea slugs and other slugs in the sea, they breathe through gills, which are found at the back of the animal. And if you ever look at these creatures, they've got an amazing way of using their prey items. These slugs eat hydroids, and hydroids have stinging cells. And the slugs manage to eat the hydroids and use their cells in their gills to sting predators. and they've never been to chemistry class. Absolutely amazing. Next slide, please. These are the periwinkles we saw earlier, and they have gills hidden within the shell and in their mantle cavity, and they'll use that cavity when the tide goes out to remain alive. It's filled with water so they can breathe. Next slide, please. Some snails are amphibious, like these apple snails. They can actually leave the water for in search of food. Now, these have a lung and a gill, so they can use a special siphon if they're submerged in murky water where the oxygen is quite low. They're like a snorkel. It's an amazing bit of kit. Next slide, please. Slugs and snails are known for their slime. They produce a lot of slime for a number of different reasons, and the pedal gland highlighted here in this banana slug produces slime that enables the slug to crawl over a number of different surfaces, even razor sharp surfaces. Next slide, please. Now my film isn't working tonight, so I'll go to the next slide, please. It's one thing to have slime. It's a whole different thing to have the ability to use that slime to your advantage. And the foot is a genius piece of creation. Slugs are able to manipulate that slime so they can crawl over almost any terrain. It's an amazing body plan that works extremely well. Next slide, please. We've tried to duplicate that ourselves with robo snail or robo slug, but again, it's dwarfed by the mastery seen in the creation of the gastropods. Next slide, please. Now, slime has amazing properties, and they've just been on this for some time actually. The Chilean snail farmers found that their skin healed quite quickly when they handled snails to the French food market, and so now there are various creams and lotions that use snail slime to soothe and regenerate and heal skin, even combat things like acne, reduce pigmentation, scarring, and even wrinkles. Happy days. Next slide, please. And some slime can be dangerous in a dangerous way. The banana slugs, if you step on one, literally work like banana skins. And so in parts of California, you find these signs up to warn you that these slugs are dangerous. Their bodies are, next slide, please. Thank you. So their bodies are covered in sensory cells. That enables them to literally taste their way through the forest floor. Slugs are rather unique in that their body is covered in nerve cells as well, so they can react to light and darkness from all different angles. They can detect changes in temperature, and more than any other creature actually. They're plugged and wired into seasonal changes that I find absolutely amazing. Next slide, please. Now, if you're a snail, you can use slime to your advantage when it gets rather dry, and snails can use this by they'll seal their shell with a layer of mucus, and that will form a film that allows the snail to breathe but prevents the snail from drying out. Next slide, please. This is the Roman snail, and that has a rather unique way of passing through winter. That will produce an epiphragm, that's white plate you can see on the shell there. It will produce that to a bit like double glazing. It protects it from the harshness of winter. Next slide, please. One common feature in sea snails, and you do find it also in some land snails, is called the operculum, and that's an organic trapdoor that sits on the tail of the creature. So when it's crawling along and it's worried or concerned, scared, it will withdraw into its shell and be protected. And of course, when the tide rolls out, it prevents the creature from being desiccated. Next slide, please. They're known for their beauty. There's quite something special about the shell. Maybe you've enjoyed shell collecting at the beach on holiday. In Guadeloupe, these conch shells are known as the queen conch, and they're edible. So these are, again, another sea snail you can eat, locally known as lombi. Next slide, please. And then, of course, there's a beautiful helix structure of the Roman snail shell. Next slide, please. Also known as Spira mirabilis, or the miraculous spiral. Jacob Bernoulli in the 1600s was fascinated by these unique mathematical properties. The size of the spiral increases, but the shape remains unaltered with each successive curve. And if you step back further to 12th and 13th century, there was the Italian mathematician Fibonacci, who popularized, next slide please, the famous Fibonacci sequence, or I think it's where you have numbers 0 and 1 are followed by each subsequent number being the sum of the previous two. And you can draw these arcs connecting the corners, and you get this beautiful pattern developing. Quite special. Next slide, please. And the construction of the shell is a builder's dream. It really is. There's layers that serve a special purpose. And it's a true marvel. It really is. If you look at the top layer there in the light brown gold, that's an organic skin called the periostracum. That can wear off. In fact, if you pick up a snail, look underneath it, and that's where you'll find some wear and tear. The next layer is called the ostracum, and that has two layers to it, two calcareous layers. There's a prismatic layer that's packed quite tightly across the top there, and then a plate layer which further serves stability. And last of all, there's this sort of nacreous layer or hypostracum inside the shell. And next slide, please. If a snail, for example, gets trod on, the snail can repair itself. It can take some beating. The snail will slowly over time use that nacreous layer to build up inside and repair the damage. These snails aren't impervious, but they do wonderfully repair themselves given time. So if you do happen to tread on the snail, leave it alone. It'll crawl away, hopefully, and repair itself. Next slide, please. Inside is a world of molecular machinery, and this is a very crude picture, really, of the complexity you find inside the shell of the snail. Slugs and snails are cold-blooded. Their blood is pale blue, copper-based, unlike ours. Towards the apex of the shell there, you'll see the liver. You've got the kidney, the mantle, the heart, and of course the lung cavity. And also superbly placed and positioned to fulfill their function and purpose in life. Next slide, please. As we close here, it's a quick walk through their life cycle, which you might find interesting. Here's a clutch I took many years ago of some Roman snail eggs just been laid. The adult will excavate a egg chamber and then lay a large clutch of eggs. Most slugs and snails you'll find are hermaphrodites. They carry both male and female reproductive apparatus, and both will, in some, well, not all, but most will lay eggs afterwards. Next slide, please. This is the Gold Coast snail, one of the African giants my daughters held many years ago, and this reproduced without another snail. Next slide, please. Here are the eggs, quite exquisite. Next slide, please. And when they hatch, they actually hatch with a shell. Some folk find that quite unusual, but they actually hatch with a shell. Next slide, please. In this African Gold Coast snail, this is a hatchling that was produced without any parental, without any mating involved. Of quite an exquisite find. I was in my office one day. I had eggs in there I knew needed to be taken out the enclosure, and lo and behold, one of them hatched. I was quite surprised. This snail had been kept alone for years without any other contact with any other snail. Next slide, please. This is Achatina auriguli. This is one of the African species. They don't lay eggs, but they give birth to live, mobile baby snails. I was given one of these, I think it was through London Zoo many years ago. Woke up one morning and I had 20 lies staring at me. Quite shocking. They give birth to live young. Next slide, please. The pond snails lay eggs in a soft jelly, which is often attached to plants. Next slide, please. These are whelk eggs, I think now vacated. These are laid around January on our coastlines, and they sometimes get washed ashore. If the egg case has a yellow colour to it, you might find some baby whelks still inside. Next slide, please. And these beautiful bead-like eggs belong to the apple snail. And they lay their eggs above the waterline, and they won't hatch if they're submerged. Next slide, please. This is a sea slug, and it's laying these beautiful flat ribbons. The eggs of sea slugs will develop either directly into small crawling baby slugs, or they'll emerge indirectly into these what's called veliger larvae. Next slide, please. And here's one example. It's planktonic larval form, which will develop later into a juvenile sea slug. This is a sea hare you'll find in certainly British coastlines, and there's a huge one that was in California. Next slide, please. After about 6 weeks, half weeks, these tiger slugs will hatch, and they're left to fend for themselves. Next slide, please. And after 2 or 3 weeks, you will find the banding appears on the adults. Next slide, please. These are banana slug eggs and a young hatchling. Again, it takes a few days for the slug to get its colour, but from a very early age, you can identify the species. Next slide, please. This is one I took nearly 20 years ago now. This is a typical Orion rufus. You can see on the back of the tail there a little pit called the caudal mucus pit. That's a key ID for these particular Arionid slugs. Next slide, please. This is a very young Roman snail, and these will take about 2 or 3 years, can do, to reach full maturity. In their first autumn, they'll burrow down, produce a lovely epiphragm, and they'll go through the seasons. Next slide, please. Before they reach adulthood. And what's surprising, next slide, please, Sam, thank you. What's so surprising about these snails, and I did mention this earlier, is the way they build these amazing screens for the winter. This is porous. It allows the snail to breathe. It also allows the snail to vent away waste gases. It also waterproofs the creature. And these epiphragms enable the snail to maintain an internal humidity at a very comfortable range. And in this case, the Roman snail, the snail impregnates that epiphragm with chalk. I find the process of hibernation with these particular snails absolutely amazing. They make their own antifreeze. They get rid of unwanted water and large proteins in their blood to break them down into smaller molecules. And the heartbeat will slow down from 34 beats per minute to around 3 to 4 beats per minute. And despite losing 50% of their body weight, I find amazing, after 7 months of dormancy, they'll emerge in April and replenish their losses. It's a truly remarkable process that always blows my mind. And there's so much more to discover. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. And whether it's woods or climbs, Next slide, please. Or rock pools. Next slide, please. Or your local park or garden. I encourage you. You'll be amazed at what lives there when you start lifting up stones. Why not plan to have a slug hunt one night and see what's crawling around your back garden? You'll be amazed. And of course, they are amazing pets, and people give me a sideways look when I say that, but it's true. They are amazing pets. They're charming, actually, and you can learn loads. They won't fetch your slippers. If they did, it would take some time. Next slide, please. I've discovered tons by literally watching them as a young boy growing up. And this is a slug I reared many years ago. Next slide, please. That produces frost-resistant eggs. The slug died in my shed of old age. The eggs were laid and they were rock solid, and they emerged when the weather changed. Absolutely amazing. Next slide, please. And the babies, next slide, please, Sam. Sorry, 2 slides there. The babies, when they emerge, are lovely pale cream. And next slide, please. They'll turn to a shade of brown. And this particular species, when reaching adulthood, slowly began to lose that brown texture and color. And this next slide, please. This beautiful Satsuma orange was just so bright and incredibly vibrant as it changed. It's an amazing process to see from this juvenile stage, adult stage, how the slug changed color. Absolutely amazing. I encourage you to find an Aryan slug and watch it for a while. They're amazing animals. Next slide, please. And of course, there's a famous giant African land snails, and I'm a big fan of these. And they don't bark, they don't smell, no huge vet bills, and they won't eat you out of house and home. And they'll teach you a lot about life in the slow lane. They really will. Next slide, please. Well, I want to just wrap up our thoughts tonight with some thoughts from the scriptures. Job chapter 12, verse 7. I think that's the wrong reference, actually. Ask the beasts and they'll teach you. Ask the birds of the air and they'll tell you. Speak to the earth and it will teach you. And the fish of the sea will explain to you. Next slide, please. Who among all these does not know the hand of the Lord has done this? Next slide, please. Next slide, please. I think it's also easy to get the wrong perspective. It's also easy to have the wrong attitude to life. And I think slugs and snails are a wonderful example of how we get it so wrong. Next slide, please. But what about us? What about your perspective on humanity? You know, if you get this wrong, if you get this perspective wrong, it's serious. If we can't answer this question of identity, who we are, then it leads to all kinds of problems. Like, for example, next slide, please. We live in a world, don't we, where there's joy and sorrow side by side. Why is that? Next slide, please. We live in a world where there's love and hate side by side. Why is that? Next slide, please. We live in a world where there's life and death. What's your perspective on that? How do you answer that? How do you see that? Next slide, please. Well, when you start with this foundation, you get corrective vision. Isaiah 59, verse 2. Next slide, please, Sam. Says, your iniquities have separated you from your God, and your sins have hidden his face from you. Next slide, please. Our sin is the reason why there's hate in the world. It's the reason why there's sorrow, why there's death, why there's groaning and corruption. The Bible says the creation itself groans because of us. It's corrupted because of us. Our sin has brought the world to futility. Next slide, please. Sin is an old-fashioned word, but it's the breaking of God's law, like the Ten Commandments. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. We are commanded by God not to lie, but we do. Next slide, please. Lying lips, says Proverbs, are an abomination to the Lord. An abomination, lying lips. And Jesus warned in Matthew 12, next slide, please, that every idle word men shall speak, they'll give account on the day of judgment. Next slide, please. But God's clear, the Bible's clear, that God's not willing any of us perish beyond this life, but we change our thinking. I love this verse. He's not willing any perish, but all should come to repentance. Repentance is an old-fashioned word. It means to change your mind. Change your mind towards God. Change your mind, your perspective towards sin. And change your mind, your perspective towards Jesus. Next slide, please. Change your mind and recognize that without trusting the work of Christ, man faces an eternal hell for his sins. That's the punishment we deserve, isn't it? We've broken his world. We've messed up his planet. And why should anyone face the end of that road when God has given us his one and only Son? We broke the law, but Jesus paid for that in full. And the Bible declares tonight that all those who trust in him as Lord and Saviour pass from death to life. Next slide, please. If you've not put your trust tonight in Christ, I encourage you to do so. Don't ever leave it. I remember these words I read that led to my salvation some 26 years ago. If you live without Christ, you will die without Christ. And if you die without Christ, you'll spend eternity without Christ. The Bible says, seek the Lord while he may be found. Call upon him while he is near. Make sure you make your peace with God and have renewed thinking. Next slide, please. We speak about perspectives tonight, and we speak about realities. God is in the business of transforming our minds. I read a poem some years ago. It goes like this. How manifold are the works of the Lord. In wisdom he made them all. The earth is full of his possessions, including slugs, both great and small. To God be the glory. Amen.
Amen. And thank you very much for that, Simon. That was fantastic. We really appreciate it. And John has had to drop away, but he shall hopefully be back. He's told me he's hoping to come back before we finish. But it's about time we sort of wrap things up now. But Sam, do we have some thank yous and some questions for Simon?
Yes. Just before we jump in, Simon, I thought you might like to know, when I was growing up, I actually owned a giant African land snail. Called it Nick, named after Nick Totopoulos from the Godzilla film, which I was so fond of at the time that I decided everything had to be to do with Godzilla. Anyway, I diverged, but he was a lovely creature, and it did teach me a lot about how to take care of an animal. Got Doki Doki coming in here with 5 US buckaroos. A hippo character runs at high speed, his legs forming a ball-like blur, much like Sonic the Hedgehog.
Just to give you a bit of background here, Simon.
Yes, we should probably explain. So if you view on YouTube, you can actually see these like proper pictures. But because of the software that we use to stream it out to Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch and things like that at the same time, we don't get that. So I have to do an interpretation of them live So it can get quite funny. So anyway, I'll do a hippie character running. There we go. We've got 30 Aussie buckaroos from George Bond. John, you're scaring people away from Jurassic Park by showing all those snakes. What are you talking about, George? Snakes are lovely. Just don't prod the deadly ones, and you'll be fine. Neil Gridley coming in with 10 British buckaroos. Thank you so much, Neil. God bless you. We've got Doki again coming in with 2 US buckaroos. A pixelated hippo chomps on a 1-up. For those uninitiated, a 1-up is from video games. So there you go. See if there are any further. I don't think there are, unless I haven't missed any. Let me check the other. Oh, here we go. Doki's coming with another one. 149 US buckaroos, a red box of popcorn. Thank you very much, Doki. Right, so let's do some questions. This is a good one here. Joe, you can probably weigh in on this one as well. Why would God make snails with venom? Thank you for your answering.
Well, that's something that's a presumption, isn't it? That he actually made them with venom. We don't know he made them with venom. There's many creatures today that have venom. That I suspect that's one of the many changes in creation since the fall. I don't believe that's something that could have been in the beginning. There's many snakes, for example, have venom. You know, tarantulas have venom, but again, it's not something that I would say would have been inherent in the original creation.
And it's worth looking at some examples of other creatures, particularly reptiles, which are vegetarian and yet still have venom. So green iguanas, for instance, have mild forms of rattlesnake venom. Bearded dragons have mild forms of venom, and the iguana is 100% vegetarian. The bearded dragon is 80% vegetarian, and they don't use their venom to kill with. They're just sort of snapping up little bugs. And what's interesting is you start to look into why green iguanas have venom, because there's nothing evolutionary in their history that would suggest that they used to be carnivores. And when they first found venom inside of iguanas, it was sort of, well, what on earth is it for? Turns out that it's for exactly what other venom does, which is effectively to digest things. It breaks down cell walls, whether it's in snakes, you have a hemotoxin and a neurotoxin. One breaks down your blood, so it coagulates. One breaks down the ends of your nerve cells so that you're paralyzed. But in both cases, it's a digestive process. So venom, you've also got to think outside the box, because not only do we have a fallen world, but we also have a world in which venom is viewed as purely bad. And it's true. If you get partially digested by venom, it's not going to do you much good. But in the original creation, what would have been used for? Well, in green iguanas, they still use it today for breaking down cellulose in plants. So I see no reason why a lot of other venoms wouldn't have been used for similar purposes as well. Sometimes it's just worth looking outside the box a little bit.
Yeah.
Any other questions there, Sam?
Yes, we've got a few. So we've got another one coming from, this one's from Honesty Angel, referring to the bananas, the appropriately named banana slugs. Does it hurt the slug if you slip on it?
Yes, it does. It does hurt a lot. They tend to get completely squished. Their body acts like a banana skin, so you literally go flying head over apex. That's why those signs are in place, to protect humans from serious injury. Yeah.
Just sort of like to follow on slightly, because when you put salt on a slug, it dies and goes all really gooey and horrible. Why does that happen?
Yeah, it's a very cruel way of killing a slug or a snail. Their body, first of all, is covered in these nerve endings. So when you put salt on the animal, it literally squirms in pain. But it's the process of osmosis. The waters drag through the cells, and they're literally trying to climb out their own slime to get rid of all the salt. So they die very, very quickly and very, very painfully.
Nasty business.
Well, remind me never to put salt on the slug again.
Never do that. It's horrible.
Right, okay. This one comes in from George Bond. How large can snails and slugs get? Do we have fossils of them?
Well, the land snails, the big achatinus from West Africa, you can get up to over a foot long. That's the land snails. In the sea, they get extremely big. So there's the Australian trumpet, which I think grows to about 3 feet long. That's the sea snail. And the biggest ones are in the sea. You've got your horse conch, for example. That's a whopper. Sea slugs are bigger as well in the sea. I think it's called the Californian sea slug. That grows, I think it weighs around 19 kilos. It's about 3 feet long. It's a huge black sea hare. It's a massive thing. But on land, the biggest land slug we have is actually from this country. It's called Limax niger, and it's the ash black, and it is an indicator of ancient woodland, and it can grow. There are rare figures of about 30 centimeters long for an outstretched individual. So that's a pretty big land slug for the UK and across the world. The Aria Limax banana slugs are the second big contender, and they'll grow to about, for the grandparents, about 10, 11 inches long, and they're whoppers. So on land, they are big, but not as big as those live in the sea. And fossil remains, that's not my should you say speciality, but perhaps Joseph could perhaps answer that. But I do know there's lots of fossil evidence of obviously land snails and sea snails.
Yeah. If we go into the sea snail world, the sort of the marine gastropod type things, if you look up some of the marine gastropods that you get from France, and we're talking shells that can get sort of 1.5 meters in length, huge, great big things. Their name actually is Gigantium, right? Is their species name, and they're identical to certain types of modern sea snails as well, with one exception. They used to be big, now they're little. So they've changed for sure, but they haven't evolved. They've gone downhill. So you've got this same sort of evidence of good to bad to worse, this diversity that you see, but simply not being able to sustain such a size anymore. But yes, you can get very, very large fossil ones as well. But then, I mean, your giant clams and the like are still your mollusks, even though they're not snails and slugs. They're still in the sort of the mollusky shelled kind of grouping that we've grouped them in. So they can get pretty big, the giant clams as well. Well, Sam, while you finish off questions and say goodbye, I'm going to have to run because I've got an appointment in about 10 minutes. But Simon, can I just say it's been wonderful to have you. Thank you so much. We really, really appreciate you being on the program, and we'll catch up a little bit later. But Sam, I'll hand over to you.
No worries, that's absolutely fine. I'm happy to stay on and wrangle some more questions out of Simon. So the next question on my list here comes in from Doki Doki Bible Club. Are we related to snails millions of years ago, like the evolutionists suggest?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
Good answer.
God is so clear about this, and the thought that we actually have we have an ant, and that's the same lineage with snails is ridiculous. It really is. How on earth that's come to be established as a scientific thought, I just don't know. It's just way beyond the powers of education. The scriptures are clear. Land snails are a kind, as are sea snails and sea slugs, independently created.
Yes, I would agree there. Those phylogenetic trees that you see on the walls of museums, no one has actually observed any of that. All we can observe today are the living creatures. The classification system was originally set up, as you clearly said, Simon, was to just organize our knowledge. So it was started out as a way of just organizing what we see. The classification with the evolutionary tree starting from some sort of single-celled creature that evolved into all of us and all of the snails and everything in between, that it has been imposed on the knowledge. It purely exists in people's minds. No one's ever seen that happen. So it's just evolutionary imagination.
Indeed. I'm just seeing if there's any more questions. We've done. This one again coming from Doki Doki. Have you ever eaten escargot? Did you like it?
Well, I have eaten
This is
escargot. I can't say that I'm particularly impressed. It's just that it was offered as an option in a restaurant I was at, and I thought, oh well, I'll try it just to say that I have tried it. If it was served up to me again, I would eat it, but I think it's overrated.
Yeah,
But that's really my opinion as an ignorant Australian.
I had it once on a field trip to France. We visited I think it was a snail farm or something like that, and they came out with these little like shells with like snails with like garlic butter and things like. And he offered it to all the children. I took some, and I was like, "Well, never again." Ooh. No, terrible.
Yeah, I actually asked to eat some when I was a young boy. Went to France, and they served them up, and I just sat there staring at my plate, and I couldn't eat them. And my mum actually said, "Okay, I'll eat them instead." But actually, I think I might eat them now. They say it's better fresh than canned. They're like fish, so get a fresh cooked snail. It's nice. Well, I haven't eaten one. I've eaten sea snails. I've eaten periwinkles on the coast. They're quite nice. There's a little boy, a little pin, and vinegar and pepper. Very, very tasty.
Great stuff. Right, that's come to the end of our questions. We have no more. But yeah, so that is sort of the end of the question time. Thank you very much for joining us, Simon. It's been an absolute pleasure. And glad that we actually finally got you on, despite our many frantic phone calls and technical issues. Managed to get it sorted. But yeah, so thank you very much for joining. And obviously, everyone out there, please do like and share the stream. Also, as well, do subscribe. It is free. We do have a little sort of announcement from me before we close out here. Something that I did sort of tease last week for our more people who are more engaged with us will know. So we've been building something in the background for a long time, but now I can safely say, and with great joy and jubilation, that we have now officially launched our new streaming site creation. It's a new iteration of Creation Research Live called CR Live. It's the new platform for all things creation research. Just running through a few quick slides with you. So why do we need a streaming platform? We've got three problems. So the modern platforms are getting more and more aggressive with strikes and takedowns on channels much like ourselves, like on YouTube, Facebook, etc. Our second problem, modern platforms are filled with sinful things and dangerous teachings that contradict God's word and draw you further from Jesus. I mean, how many times have you clicked on a YouTube video from a Christian content creator, and then in the recommended you have talking about sinful things and things like that, trying to draw you away from teaching truth. And also as well, problem three, the existing platform that we had wasn't really fit for purpose. It was clunky, had many technical issues, and ultimately provided a very poor end user experience. So what will it do? So here are some of the things to expect from CR Live. It's have a monthly subscription, so it's going to be similar to Netflix Prime Video. Have exclusive content and live streams that would never be able to do on our existing platforms without fear of takedown. It has some free content on there, just like our YouTube channel, and no more adverts. How many times have you clicked on a Creation Research video and had an advert pop up halfway through, or even at the beginning? You know how YouTube is with ads; it can get very annoying. So I do encourage you, please do sign up. Go to www.creationresearch.live and sign up for a free account. You can subscribe. You can even buy or rent. That is coming next week. The developers who developed the platform for us couldn't quite get that ready for launch, but that is coming very, very soon. But you can now subscribe. You can do either a yearly or a monthly. You can enjoy premium documentaries through a subscription. You can enjoy our content on your computer. We're also developing an iOS and Android app, which is coming soon. And with that, you'll be able to cast it to your TV, or if you have a Fire Stick, Chromecast, etc. Also, as well, little things for you to use, to take into consideration why you see our live. It's easy to use. It's truth-filled. It's family-friendly. We've got exclusive content on there that won't be available on our YouTube channel. And also, it's available 24/7, even when we're not. Sometimes it can be a little bit difficult when we're all spread across around the world to get everyone into the same room at the same time, especially if Joe's in America, John's in Australia, I'm in the UK, etc. So pricing wise, monthly subscription is $9.99 and the yearly subscription is $90, and it is available now. It is now live, so please do go to www.creationresearch.live and sign up for a free account where you can watch some free videos. And if you do like the content, please do subscribe. It is a great way of regularly contributing to the work that we do at Creation Research. You get some content from us, and we get to have some support. And it's a win-win for everyone. And also, you get some exclusive things in there as well, and you can watch it however you want. Please do sign up to our newsletters as well. This is really important. We do stuff like this that we keep up to date with you on a regular basis. So please do sign up. It is completely free, and we don't spam you, do we, Diane?
No, we don't.
We don't spam you, so don't worry. So if you go to linkedin.bio/creation research, or if you have a smartphone, please scan it with your fancy smartphone camera. It should bring you up with a link. Click on it, and it'll take you to a list of all of our sites, how to donate, how to sign up to the newsletter, etc. So that is basically it. So that's basically the big announcement. It's now live, so please do go and check it out. We'd love your feedback as well. So go ahead, check it out this week. Come back next week and let us know how you're finding it. If you've got any notes or anything like that, please do send it across. So apart from that, it's time to end. So thank you very much for joining, Simon. It's a really, really good topic. It's an unusual topic. You don't really sort of think about associating snails and slugs with creation, but it's nice that you can actually bring so much passion and energy into studying these things, and it's really nice to see. So thank you very much for that. It's been a pleasure to have you. Thank you very much for watching, everyone. It's been a pleasure to have you. Again, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the videos around. Sign up to Creation Research Live, creationresearch.live. And without further ado, thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye now.